Welcome to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nic King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox. And together we're here to explore, understand, and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course.
Hello, welcome back to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws, sponsored by Tylenol. Sorry, I'm sure at this point you guys know that we pre-record this, so we are roughly sort of 24 hours out of Trump's Tylenol speech, and we can't quite get this out to you before Thursday because it's Tuesday. So it's happening. You will be hearing us at the end of October. So today, myself and Kate Fox are going to be: are autistic people psychic, or are neurotypicals predictably shit?
I'm loving your subtitle there, Nick. And while we're on the the Tylenol moment, Gav Cross, listener to this podcast, did send me a joke this morning. Why are there no autistic people in the jungle? Because the parrots eat them all.
Oh, bad.
We say that. Yes. So, I would love as a topic anyway, are autistic people psychic? I do actually have many and complex thoughts on this, but can you take us, Nick, to why? Because there is a link, isn't there, between Trump's latest deranged ramblings and Tylenol and psychic autistic people.
So I think if anyone wants to go back, we have Autism Causes Bingo, which we recorded early summer. So I think it'll be in the June lot somewhere, where we predicted what the outcomes of this investigation into autism was going to be, ready for the announcement in September. And me, because I am autistic and psychic, actually listed paracetamol as the first thing that we said. Now, readers across the world, paracetamol and Tylenol can be used interchangeably because it is simply what we call it in the UK versus what they call it in the US. It is the same medical product. And in that podcast, I correctly stated, or maybe, this bit hasn't come out in Trump's announcement, that many autistic women use paracetamol because it is safe and proven to be so in pregnancy, because autistic women are often also hypermobile or often also have chronic pain. And in pregnancy, essentially, paracetamol is your safest painkiller to take. And it is recommended that you can take it safely in pregnancy. And that correlation, because autistic women have autistic babies, is not causation.
And really, that would be all that needs to be said about that ever. But because Trump is unaccountably in a position of power and people, it's so, I'm glad we're refuting this and also talking about autistic people being psychic, because so many things to say. But on the other hand, honestly, it boggles my mind to be reading The Guardian and they are writing an article where they're saying what Trump and RFK Jr. have said as if they are reporting on a serious thing that's been said by serious people and then refuting it. And I'm a bit like, but they are two complete, both their brains have melted. Why are we even treating it as something to argue against? Self-evidently, everything that comes out of their mouths is ridiculous. And
I mean, he couldn't actually even say it. He couldn't pronounce it.
So you watched it, didn't you? I couldn't.
Yeah, I watched it live.
Go on.
He also outside of this, because I just felt I needed to say it because I think at about 10 o'clock last night when I was watching it alive, I yelled out, "The Amish!" Because he also brought up the fact, because the Amish don't tend to take medicine and they don't tend to have vaccines, that very few Amish people were autistic. Now, I could very easily argue that quite a lot of Amish people may well be autistic, and their very rigid lifestyle with their very rigid clothes set and their very rigid even which hairstyle that you need to select and connect with, and the fact that there is a link between autistic people and cults, religions, whatever. Is it officially a cult or religion? Not sure. Probably need to Google. Um, let's not be discounting the fact that there are many undiagnosed Amish people. And I was like, we're going into the Amish now? Because obviously they have brought up vaccines as well. I think vaccines was very, very predictable, particularly with who was, hosting and holding the study. We did also talk about vaccines and Andrew Wakefield in the Autism Causes Bingo podcast, but essentially that has also all been refuted. But that, even just putting that out there into the sphere when it happened, caused children to die and
Mm.
caused suffering because people refused a vaccine or delayed a vaccine and kids got sick. And we sit here as a population with a level of privilege where we have not seen children become seriously and significantly ill from measles and mumps and all the other things, and typhoid and all the other things that you get vaccines for because they were horrific. And now we're looking at a situation where mainly autistic mothers are going to suffer because
Yeah.
they're going to not take paracetamol or Tylenol in their pregnancy, or they're going to be judged for doing so. And I have privilege. I had that privilege of when my children were diagnosed, there was already an adult in my house diagnosed. We already were aware that we were autistic when my children were diagnosed. And I can't tell you how many mothers I have seen where they're like, "What did I do? And was it my fault? Was
Mm.
it that I had to have a C-section? Was it that I had to have an emergency birth? Was it that I didn't breastfeed for long enough? Was it that I took something, paracetamol, in my pregnancy? Was it that, I didn't come off a mental health med? Was it, do you know what I mean?" And I've seen so many women struggle with that and that guilt, and just don't. Just don't. Don't. Save a spoon. Don't.
Yeah.
Nick says don't. Don't.
Yeah. Here. Um, and in this instance, I mean, the biggest survey that was done was in Sweden on 2.4 million women and found no correlation whatsoever between, well, it just found what we know, that autism is in fact genetic.
The
But
Neurobears study, and I haven't got it in front of us, showed, because we asked, so obviously 100% of the kids that did the Neurobears study were autistic or self-identified as autistic. And then we asked like the parents whether they were diagnosed, self-identified, um, and then if they had like a first degree relative where they thought they were either autistic and self-identified. And over 90% of them said yes. And it's hereditary. And if there's more of us about, maybe there just needs to be more of us about. I'm not being funny, but nature doesn't make more of the certain type of people unless it's helpful or needed to society, because Darwinism is actually real.
those, yeah, like evolution, and also the Earth is actually round. Shock, horror. Um, but that, see, I do something else I've found difficult to see, and the Guardian article I read did this. So we we want to refute this with statistics, but actually, in a way, loads of the statistics are also just bollocks and made up. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, 1 in 33 Americans are autistic. Well, it's loads more, isn't it? Because so many are undiagnosed. We know this. And actually, all of this is also reinforcing the medical path paradigm, which is a pathology paradigm, and it's a deficit paradigm. So I suppose part of me, apart from to kind of point out the studies which note how this specific thing is wrong and that autism is genetic. Part of me doesn't want to engage in the medical narrative. It's just encouraging everybody. The Guardian quoted the Autism Science Foundation, and I just thought, I bet if I look up that link, I'm going to be annoyed by what I see on the Autism Science Foundation, even though they are using their words to refute Trump. And it did have a little bit of a peep, and it was very annoying, and I've stepped away now.
And he
Ah,
said some horrific things. So, there has never been a more appropriate time to have some self-radical love because we do not need to be cured. And, we don't need to be potentially wiped out by the lack of use of paracetamol in pregnancy. Can I talk about the fact that like we named autism, not that like autism wasn't about before we named autism, but we named autism before like we started giving paracetamol to people widely. Just saying.
exactly. I believe something like 1920 autism named, paracetamol 1955 became widely.
Widely used. So we're already missing like, 3, 4 decades of increasing the autism numbers. We could have tried harder. Like,
But it is, I do like, I would still return to, but we do know, don't we? Like, mostly autistic people know this more than anyone because we tend to be fairly forensic
mm,
in many instances. Although many of us would also say we're quite gullible, it's that complex mixture, but we tend to analyze truth claims quite strongly.
yeah.
And we really know now that pretty much everything Trump says is just silly, and it's either actively a lie or coming out of his increasingly melting brain. Why we even why we honestly, newspaper articles and the news as if it's
Also,
very
how much money have they spent on this? I mean, how much Neurobears could we have bought with that amount of money? That does actual good. Just
exactly.
saying.
And how many editions of this podcast which does
Considering we don't get paid and put it out for free. A lot.
a lot, many um work that actually, here's the thing, supports neurodivergent people. Can we address, talking of which,
Mm.
so here is an instance where it sort of might have looked like, as an autistic person, I was psychic. So I'm going to describe this instance, and it relates to a podcast listener who I also sort of feel I should apologise to as well. Okay, so I'm in the library in Bradford, and a man who, because I have no visual sense at all, I cannot now describe. So I'm hoping a crime never happens to me, because I would just have to say to the police officers, be like, "Oh, do you know, it was like a sort of a man."
Maybe.
Actually, I think he did. This man did have hair, and that's all I can say really. And he said he listens to the podcast and loves the podcast, and is in the process of getting a diagnosis, but it's quite, it's not an easy thing, and I can't quite remember what else he said. Some other thing, and I just went, you're ADHD. And he went, "Oh yeah, well that's what I'm thinking, and that's what makes it right." And I was like, "Yeah, no, you are." I was, and I said, "So hopefully you'll get there." And because I had another event to go to and be on a panel doing in about 10 minutes after that, I then had to go off and do that and just leave him. He didn't seem miffed in any way. It was like, but I was like, after I did analyze what had happened there, can I tell you what happened there? Because this relates to our autistic people psychic. So, it's like the episodes of Sherlock where you get all these things that Sherlock has seen as the clues, and they kind of whiz into the screen. I now recognise it was like that, which is interesting because later that day I was on a radio show sat next to Mark Gatiss of Sherlock, as it happens. Anyway, right. So, first of all, the man did not present to me as I'm trying to think of as a typical cliche of autistic man. Basically, he was masked, quite masked. Okay, so he's masked, first of all. So already, and in a man, middle-aged man, more likely to have the ADHD element. Second, he said he loves the podcast. So so for a man to already, I'm like, I mean, we skew ADHD, I think, as a podcast.
Yeah.
Um, Third of all, I'm sure there was another reason. Like there were more reasons. I think, oh yeah, that he was. Oh yeah, okay. So if you work in a library, you can totally. But you're autistic alone. A library is a great place to just. You don't have to mask in a library as a librarian, but he did. So again, the ADHD more likely, if you see what I mean. Um, all these things. Oh, and the fact that he was saying it was complicated. I was like, oh yeah, because it's not obvious that he's one thing or the other. So in the 2 seconds, I'd put all these together
Mm.
and didn't have time, therefore, to filter whether I should just say so or explain where this had come from. I mean, I'm not doubting my own genius here, by the way. This pattern recognition, fairly sure, totally accurate. Stand by it. Maybe don't say it always. It's probably fine. Um, Anyway, so that looked psychic, but it wasn't, was it? It was just a lot of information gathered in a short time, helped by the fact that I had adrenaline because I'd been doing events. I don't always have the adrenaline to power my brain to do that.
Hopefully, you're enjoying our chat and you can show your support by leaving us a tip, the equivalent of a cuppa, via the PayPal link on our website at neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk. We would really appreciate your help in keeping our podcast going.
It's a very neurodivergent, particularly if we're talking about autistic and ADHD way of thinking, where we have literally processed every possible outcome, every possible scenario, every possible pattern within zero point 0.2 seconds, and we have the answer and the solution. And then you're like, somebody's like, yeah, but, and you're like, no, 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 I've done the math. Like I've ran every possible scenario here, every possible outcome, every possible answer. This is the right one. And then like they're like, skeptical look. And I'm like, have you even had one thought process yet? Like,
And it's back to that thing in maths lessons of show you're working. But you'd be like, well, yeah, but I just did it in my head. I mean, I didn't because maths, I struggled, but people do, don't they? They do. Some people can do maths problems and not need to show they're working. And many of us could do, other types of life problems, and we don't need to show our working because there's a lot going on there quickly. Yes.
and it's so many different thought processes at once that you have in full clarity. Like you're saying, that sort of that idea of like all those sort of pictures and patterns coming in at once. But then, yeah, there's the complication of the social scenario behind that, isn't there? And how well it may or may not be received.
Exactly. I mean, again, the calculation was he had in fact approached me
Yeah,
and did have an unanswered question
yeah.
and may not have thought that I was about to unsolicitedly answer that question, but also they felt like they were in favour of that. So it kind of felt all right, really. Um, but complicatedly, I do have to say, also, I kind of think that a lot of autistic people are at a greater depth than just that pattern recognition, able to pick up information that is in the environment around them, some of which is non-verbal, some of which I do feel is probably something a bit more. People say it's mystical, but I don't think it is. It's just more information than we know is available to us in a quantum sort of way. And I think we do pick it up. And therefore, kind of, yes, I experience a lot of what seem to be telepathies and synchronicities with my fellow neurodivergent humans in certain settings. But I think it's because we've just picked loads of information out of the environment, possibly sometimes a little bit ahead of time,
I
maybe.
think it's somewhere in there, isn't there, between sort of somewhere between hyper empathy. I don't know how to say it outside of aura and vibes and that kind of thing. But so, for example, right, we were down in London in August, and we were doing a backstage tour of Drury Lane. Okay. And there was a seat in the corner of this basement type area. And the tour guide sort of, I assume almost jokingly, because I don't think they would have actually let it happen, be like, and they said, who wants to sit in the chair? And I took one look at this chair, having, to be honest, already clocked it at a different part of the tour when it was sort of in a slightly separate area. I had clocked this chair. It was on my radar, right? And because I had Zed with us, and Zed's always the first to volunteer for anything, they were like, I'll sit in the chair. And I went, Zed, you do not sit in that chair. That chair clearly has bad vibes. You're not sitting in the chair. And to next words out of the woman's mouth was, this is Hitler's chair.
Mm.
And she was like, did you know that? And I was like, no, that is clearly bad chair. Like, that is bad chair. And I had no, it was just a leather armchair. Like, it's not like it had any obvious sign that it was really bad chair. And that's not even a person. I can read people better than I can read chairs.
That's a good statement for a CV.
Indeed, I can read people better than I can read chairs, and I'm quite good at chairs. There you go.
See, and I feel, and I should mention, because a lot of people, possibly some of our listeners, will have heard of this or heard some of this as being a massive hit podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, where, in summary, autistic kids were tested in an experiment, but they were non-verbal autistic kids, and often they seem to be thinking of what the experimenter was thinking of, and they're like, whoa, autistic kids, not only have they got superpowers that justify their existence, but they're telepathic, they are basically X-Men type narrative has arisen. A critique of that is that the kids were using augmented communication systems, and actually that someone was just feeding them the stuff. I mean, yes, maybe that. However, also, isn't there potentially a really interesting thing happening around this neurodivergent people being more likely to be able to read and connect patterns, energies, floaty stuff that's maybe not always necessarily in the same timeline that we're in. But it would be very hard now to argue that in the face of the telepathy tapes looking kind of a bit made up and woo. So
I think on a sort of a woo level, I think, there are quite a lot of us that can literally hear the electricity in the walls. And reasonably, you know, physically objects store energy, and they do. They store atoms and they store energy. And it is well outside of my sphere of woo to like have any kind of foundation to that. But realistically, energy is stored within objects and within people and within time. And if we are the kind of person that is literally able to sort of, hear the energy in the walls, are we slightly more aware and slightly more attuned? And does that sort of combine with our processing and our ability to sort of put ideas and thoughts and processes together and just make a good call more often than not?
yes, yes, and yes. And that takes us kind of back to the Trump ridiculousness, because actually, in a rational materialist science paradigm, a Newtonian physics is all there is paradigm, which is where we still are with a lot of science, then there cannot be a metaphysics, there cannot be anything outside of what we can touch and measure. And yet, quantum physics is going, whoa, everyone, it's all a bit more complicated than that. And yet we still talk in the dominant materialist rationalist paradigm. And to me, that's irrational, in the same way that it's irrational to only talk about autism within the medical paradigm. I have, and I suppose I'll have to, it's funny, I don't point people to this podcast as much as I should, because I am so unfiltered on here. So I should advertise it more. I'm sorry that I don't. And I'm going to say discreetly in some way, over the last 2 or 3 years, I have found myself in a position of being almost like a confessor figure, almost not confessor figure, to a few neurodivergent people, some of whom knew they were, some of whom didn't, who had a lot of basically psychic type experiences, but were themselves quite skeptical and brought up within the rationalist paradigm and really questioned their sanity, what was happening, what it meant. You know, what did it mean? What does it mean? And I have been able to say, well, maybe it's not so much about the meaning that it's got from the outside, it's about the meaning that you give to the fact that you clearly are perceiving things often in a different way to lots of people around you, and you are picking up on these things and you're not imagining it and you're not crackers and it's okay, you know, but actually to it feels it's another way that people are isolated if they're having these type of experiences, but there's not any validation at all for it. And actually, maybe you could get validation in the world of the new age spiritual woo world, which I'm not condemning all of, but a lot of it is bollocks, really. But you know, that's quite difficult then, isn't it? Really.
And I do, and I think it sits uncomfortably with people. I think my husband is very much of the, you know, ghosts don't exist, nothing like that. You know, he's very much sort of straight line kind of thinking on that. However, I know in our relationship he's had at least three experiences, two of which we had jointly, where he was like, "Did that happen?" And I definitely don't believe that, but I also believe that that just happened. And it's really conflicting for him because he, you know, he's quite strong and he's sort of like that isn't in existence, but at the same time, he was like, I can't explain that. And then yeah, he did end up doing a deep dive into sort of like how I atoms and stuff stay in the atmosphere and things like that. That was where that rabbit hole went. So it was good information.
Have we, because we've kind of got 3 minutes left to reach our half hour. Is there a kind of mini ghost story you could tell then in the next 3 minutes that takes us out for Halloween?
Yeah, go on then, since it is Halloween tomorrow. It was our old house, and me and my husband were both sat in our living room, random night after work, and the front door opened, and there was something that felt very, very angry, came in, stomped through the door, stomped through the living room, went through the kitchen, and sort of dissipated. And I very much experienced it, but I am probably a bit more used to experiencing things like that. And I looked at him and he looked at me and I went, "Did that just happen to you as well?" And he was like, "Yeah." And it really like freaked him out. And like I say, you know, full door opening, absolutely something stomped into like the front of a door, through a living room and through the kitchen, and then was never seen again. So happy Halloween, folks. Whether you be psychic, wooey, witchy, or just autistically ADHD, I hope you have a good spooky season. Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nic King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.